Politicians in Trinidad and Tobago have historically been identified as having a private personal agenda as well as a public political agenda. There is a dilemma between a type of good and a type of evil that presents a choice of one of two ways for those who place themselves up for representation of public office. It is generally understood that the poor masses who provide the bulk votes do not provide campaign financing, and likewise the business elite from the corporate community who do not provide the monies for the poor but ensure that they finance the political parties, that they are way too small a group to change election outcomes by their numbers. So you have two different groups who are competing for the attention of the politicians. You have the poor masses who exist in the hundreds of thousands, and then you have the business elite that exists in the tens and twenties. Both of them have something that the politician needs. The poor have the votes, but no money. And the business elite have the money, but they don't have enough votes. And they hold two completely distinct agendas. What complicates the situation even more is the fact that the wishes of the business owners class are often completely opposite to the desires of the working class. The politician is then faced with having to either represent the masses, represent the elites, or try to strike a workable balance between the two. Because whatever happens, he has to appeal to both of them. And appealing to both sides is the option that obviously is the most logical choice, because as they would say, they want to please everybody. However, it may in some cases be an impossible balancing act. The machinery of capitalism often dictates that the rich can only be rich if the poor are poor. The wealth of the rich is maintained for as long as the deprivation of the poor is maintained. And while the rich get richer, the poor continue to get poorer. And this is why the Bible says in the book of Proverbs that the rich rule over the poor and the borrower is a slave to the lender. And there is an economic system within our country where the poor people are continually under the status or category of borrowers, and the rich are the lenders. So for as long as you don't own where you live, as long as you're renting, as long as you're not in possession of personal belongings that are absolutely necessary for your survival, and you have to rent and beg and borrow and be driven to the point of desperation and deprivation, then you are a modern day slave. In some cases, it's not your fault, but the economic principles of capitalism have been designed in this way to ensure that the poor people stay poor, because if they don't, then the rich cannot be rich. Here comes the politician claiming to represent both sides. Bearing the circumstances in mind, it is highly likely that there will be a number of contradictions in what he has to say, because when he goes to one group, which is on a public platform, he must say things to them to convince them that he is a sincere, genuine individual who is concerned about their best interest. But the other kinds of meetings are not public meetings. The other kinds of meetings are boardroom meetings, around long tables, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner meetings. In many cases where there are hardly any media or television cameras or tape recorders present at those meetings, and private promises are made. When the candidate goes to the poor, he makes promises to them. But when he goes to the rich, the promises go both ways, because, okay, I'm going to exaggerate this point to make a point. And that is that the politician will go to the elites in their executive boardroom meetings, and the politician will make promises to the elites, and the elites will also make promises to the politicians. That, boy, when you get in power, we will position you in a particular way, or we will give you the strength to ensure that your agenda is met. And the business leaders have their own manifesto as if they're campaigning too. Don't you know, and I don't have to call names, that there are specific families in this country, powerful, wealthy families in this country, who have family members in both sides of the major political divide, so that regardless of who wins, they have a family interest agenda in the dead center of the political regime that is exercising power over the nation. Those are what you call political games. And as a matter of fact, political games are taking place on every level. But on the top level, both sides are players. On the grassroots level, most of the times, it is the politicians who are the players, and the poor are getting played. So because there is a conflict of interest between the major groups who are competing for the attention of the politicians, it is likely, not because they're bad people, but because of how the system is, it is likely that they will lie to you when they talk to you. Every single individual has the right to choose, but the question is each individual equipped with the critical thinking skills and sense of rationality necessary to make an informed, educated decision? We must bear in mind that millions of dollars are spent in an attempt to get people to think in ways that they may not have thought ordinarily. There is an enormous financial budget that is aimed at manipulating the minds of the masses, at controlling the reasoning process of the population to even make unreasonable decisions if necessary. They put out millions of dollars, they raise capital, all with the objective of trying to get you to think in a way that is not in your best interest, but in a way that is in their best interest. Different groups have an influence on their membership base, and different groups also have leadership, and the political entrepreneurs make an effort to woo the leadership of peer groups, families, community groups, ethnic groups, and religious groups in a skillful art of deception to convince persons that they are for. Politics is the process by which individuals and groups make decisions. Politics is the authoritative allocation of values. The term politics itself is generally applied to behavior within governments, but it is also used in other types of groups where there is human interaction. There is politics in business, politics in academics, politics in religious institutions, politics in sporting fraternities. And it is a fight, a wrestle, to get people to think in a particular way. But the difference between politics in a club or group or institutional organization is that millions of dollars are not spent to try to get people to think differently. But in government politics, it is a major investment. And businesses invest their money expecting some kind of return. Understand that. A businessman under normal circumstances does not give $1 million or $3 million to a political party because they like them so much. Since when? It is the nature of the business executive elite, the corporate sector, to place monies in areas where there is some kind of return. Likewise, within party politics, when someone makes a contribution, they are expecting some kind of return, an exchange. Politics is also the regulation and government of a nation state and the methods and tactics used to formulate and apply government policy. But politics in Trinidad and Tobago is a little bit less about policy and it's a little bit more about process. Let me explain what I mean. You see, policy is actually the methods, the techniques, the strategies, the programs, and the procedures to actually operate the country. The educational system, the health system, the national security system, the agriculture. What strategies and systems are there in place to ensure that the society is functional in all of its different sectors? See, that's policy. But the process that Trinidad politics is more about is how to get to sit in that seat. And many times, as far as some of them are concerned, the job ends when they get in office. You see, really, the job is supposed to begin when you get in office. But for the strategists, for the theorists, for the campaign technicians, for those who design the artwork and the literature to attempt to bamboozle and seduce the population, for them as well as for some of the politicians themselves, as soon as they achieve that and they're voted in, their work is over. And once the job is over and they are put in a position, it's time to give the returns. It's now time to pay back. Not pay back the masses for voting for them, but to pay back the business elite. And all of a sudden, you'll find all kinds of strange things happening. All kinds of government decisions will be made that were never in the manifesto, that were never discussed in Parliament, that were never spoken about on the political platforms. But you find that millions of dollars will go here, millions of dollars will go there. This particular business will get those contracts to build this and that, and other corporations will get those contracts to do other things. And millions of dollars are just going back and forth in front of the eyes of the poor people who voted for the politicians in the first place. And the payback time usually takes about 4.5 years. And after the 4.5 year period of interacting with the business elites, there is a 6-month period where they interact with the poor. So there you have it. 4.5 years for the business executives, half a year to interact with the poor. And the interaction with the poor is called campaigning. When we had PNM and DLP, the same way that a decade or so later we had PNM and ULF, the same way that we had a decade after that PNM and UNC, there was always this ethnic division in politics in Trinidad and Tobago. But around the time when DLP came forth and you had PNM and DLP, to outside observers it looked as if politics in Trinidad and Tobago was maturing, because we now had these two major parties, just like in America, how you have the Republicans and the Democrats, just like in England, you have the Conservative and Labour, and in many other developed parts of the world, you have this two-party system. With DLP and PNM emerging, it appeared that politics in Trinidad and Tobago was maturing to the stage where we had this kind of system, and we hoped, of course, that a lot would come out of it. But the same style that we have today, where it seems that whoever is in opposition is more concerned with holding back whoever is in power, and whoever's in power is more preoccupied with shielding or defending themselves from whoever's in opposition. This began way back in 1960. It's called negative politics. That walk out to the parliament, that spend more time accusing each other of corruption rather than about building the country. It's called the politics of obstructionism. One party's paving roads, the other one tries to stop them from paving roads in the name of the Constitution. One party has a policy to build more schools, the other one tries to prevent them from building more schools or criticize them in the schools that they're building. Another one wants to build more hospitals. The other one spends more time condemning the hospitals rather than trying to offer some kind of support to the establishment of a health system that is in the best interests of all of the citizens. A political party has a program to build houses, to put people in the houses. The other party becomes more concerned about criticizing and condemning the houses that are being built. And this is one of the reasons that we have this backward, non-productive, non-progressive third world type of mentality where we criticize and condemn and try to dig up all types of information that is negative about one another rather than even dreaming of cooperating in the house to try to produce a better nation. But you see, when it comes to bringing about a better nation or producing a better nation or establishing a total quality nation, it is something that is said, but it is not necessarily something that is done, because our nation has been cursed with the politics of obstructionism. From as early as back then, the early 1960s, we had the same kind of division in the politics being born that we see today. At the time when the DLP rose, they were welcomed as evidence of maturity coming to local politics. But then the politics began to deteriorate. In the early 1960s, negative politics was introduced into Trinidad. There was obstructionism. So a party would make its point by trying to block another party from doing something else. They would walk out of the parliament. They would sooner criticize rather than offer an alternative. Non-stop allegations of corruption, going both ways. So I ask you, is it that there is a monopoly on Trinidad and Tobago politics? Is it that we have entered into a stage where it is almost impossible to break that stranglehold that is maintained over the political system? Is this why different political organizations exercise this kind of cliquism, where if you're not part of our circle, then you're excluded from the entire process of politics? And what would it take for Trinidad and Tobago politics to mature beyond the PNM-UNC divide that used to be the PNM-ULF divide, that used to be the PNM-DLP divide? What would it take to escape from that? And whether it's PNM-DLP, PNM-ULF, or PNM-UNC, it has always been split and divided by race and ethnicity as the number one factor. When will Trinidad grow and mature out of this?